Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. My name is Ashley Sklar. I'm the Adult Services and Community Engagement Consultant with the Division of Library Development at the Connecticut State Library. I'm sure most of you are deeply familiar with us, but DLD is the arm of the State Library that provides leadership, funding, education, and statewide services to the libraries in Connecticut. We work on a regional and national level as well with our state counterparts and partners to advance the field of librarianship and all of the humans like you that make this work possible. So to build on this work of ours, we will be sending you a survey evaluation after today's program. We much appreciate your insight. It really informs how we craft our programs and services and what we go after to bring to you next. A couple housekeeping things, as you probably heard at the top, we will be recording today's session and I happily will share that all with you after, along with slides and resources. We've also turned on the live caption feature. So at the bottom in your toolbar, you'll find an icon to hover over there. You can adjust the settings for yourself as needed. I will also be monitoring the chat throughout to answer questions. Please feel free to type them in there. You can type them as we go through the presentation. I will jump in and interrupt Melissa. She's okay with that. Or you can save them till the end as well. But again, and if you'd prefer to speak them, just let me know and I will happily give you a chance to chime in too. So with that, I'm very excited to introduce Melissa Marshall, who I first had the chance to meet during last year's Disability Awareness Week. She presented a program with Otis Library and the Norwich Commission for Persons with Disabilities. This is actually the second program that Melissa has done with us at DLD. The first was Accessible Library Programs, making the virtual world accessible to everyone. And that too is available on our LibGuides. I will put the link to that in the chat for you all so you can go explore that. There's resources in the slide presentation along with that as well. So a little bit more about Melissa. She has dedicated her career to obtaining equal access for people with all types of disabilities. At Hampshire College, where she received her bachelor's degree, she was one of the first people in the nation to major in disability studies. She received her JD from the University of Connecticut School of Law. A Connecticut attorney, Melissa is known nationally for her expertise in disability civil rights law and her bias awareness workshops. Consulting for businesses, governments, agencies, nonprofits, and extensively in schools, Melissa most recently has been using her expertise in ADA and other disability rights law to ensure that people with disabilities impacted by disaster have equal access to disaster-related programs and services. So with that, I'm very pleased to welcome and turn it over to Melissa, and I will start sharing my screen so we can all see her presentation.
And Ashley, yeah, thank you. Hi, everybody. I'm Melissa Marshall. Thank you for the wonderful introduction, Ashley. It's my honor to be here with libraries today. I told people on the team I'm working on now, I get to do a presentation for libraries, and three out of three of them went, oh, librarians are great and libraries are great, and that's so cool that you get to do that. So I'm really honored and glad to be here. So if we can go to the next slide, and Ashley is doing me the favor of switching slides for me, so I appreciate that. Want to do a couple of ground rules, and these are easy ground rules. Maintain confidentiality. Don't give a specific name or very specific situation. You all know that. I don't need to tell you that, but maintain confidentiality. Ask questions. Ashley talked about that. If you have a question, I guarantee someone else has a question or will have that question later. So be brave enough to be the person who raises their hands or puts the question. You're going to have people put the question in the chat, Ashley, is what you said? The Q&A box. Put that question in there. Don't hesitate to interrupt. Put your question in when it occurs to you. At any time that it occurs to you. It's not going to throw me, it's not going to put me off track, and you'll have my contact information at the end so we can talk in more detail if you would like to do that. So feel free, and I'm glad to answer your questions. Let's go back one. We're not done on the other. Thank you. Because that is the most important ground rule, is to have fun. People learn better when they're having fun. And Ashley and I had the opportunity to talk a few minutes before we went on, and my primary work is supporting people with disabilities and getting equal access during the pandemic. Not a particularly fun topic, but even in those trainings, I ask people to have fun because that's how you learn better. And I say to people, obviously the pandemic is serious. The consequences of the pandemic is serious and the deaths are serious. What I challenge people to do is not take themselves so seriously for 90 minutes of your life. So you have permission not to take yourself seriously for like the next 86 minutes. How cool is that? Have fun. Normally what I do when I'm in person is I give people fabulous prizes. And those are prizes you might get at a children's birthday party. And they're little different prizes. So I'm going to give you virtual fabulous prizes today, which isn't as good, but we will reunite in the world. And I'm going to owe a whole lot of people a whole lot of prizes, particularly people in Connecticut. So I'm going to carry stock with me. Feel free to remind me next time I go to the library or any library. So have fun. Next, please. So my objectives for you, my hopes for you, is you leave here with an increased understanding of conscious and unconscious disability bias. You leave with an increased understanding of disability etiquette and positive language towards people with disabilities, and an increased level of comfort with people with disabilities. Next, please. Now, if you have anything else, feel free to, that you would like to learn about, feel free to put it in the chat and I'll try to get to that, or I can talk to you about it later. This training is an overview. 90 minutes might seem like a long time, but it's really nothing. I spent, since I've been 17, thinking consciously about disability bias. I didn't call it disability bias back then, but I've been thinking about it and I learn more about it every day. So this is really not even the tip of the iceberg. This is just a little bit you're learning about disability bias, and it's a way to invite you to start looking at disability bias. Next. This is not a legal training. I feel the need to put that disclaimer in. Libraries have significant obligations to patrons, staff, and staff volunteers and members of the public, but we won't be discussing that today. There are significant legal obligations, and I am a lawyer, and we're not going there today. We're doing other stuff. Next, please. So does anyone have any individual goals they want to put in the chat? You see any, Ashley?
Not yet, but we can give people a few moments to type.
What I do in the more technical trainings, I did a more technical training this morning, and we play the Jeopardy music, which gives people time to type and prompts me to stop long enough. So the Jeopardy music hasn't stopped. I know that I shouldn't cut people off. So that's a little bit to get me to slow down. But if you have any other individual goals that you think of, please just insert them. Next, please. So, okay, I was muted, but now I'm unmuted. So 1 in 4 Americans have disabilities. Who are these people? Library patrons. That's the important thing for you to know about. Employees and applicants, colleagues, your family members, your friends, your neighbors. And if you live a long lifespan that all of us aspire to live to, there's an 80 to 90% chance you'll have a disability at some point. And that's okay. That's not a bad thing. That's not like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have a disability someday. Disability is a natural state. And if you could read what's in the chat, Ashley, because I see.
Yeah, I was just gonna, yep. So just in terms of goals for today, learn when is okay or good to present self to a disabled person without insulting them or making them uncomfortable, and how to assist deaf patrons in particular.
When it's good to present self, what do you mean by that?
I'm thinking perhaps to offer assistance, but might be inserting my thought, but yes, thank you.
To library self, okay. Yes, okay, thank you, yes. Okay, yes, we will get to all of those things. That's in the plan. So having a disability is a natural part of the human lifespan. It's just a thing that we all have, and that's okay. Next, please. Let's look at some examples of disabilities, because we all tend to think wheelchairs. Well, yeah, using a wheelchair a condition that causes you to use a wheelchair is a disability typically. Wheelchair users have disabilities. I'm a scooter user right now. I have cerebral palsy. I also have general anxiety disorder. Those are disabilities. So mental health conditions, and that's everything from generalized anxiety, order, and some people don't like diagnoses or labels, but people with schizophrenia, some people that hear voices have mental health conditions, some people don't. Bipolar is also another example of some mental health conditions. Intellectual disabilities. And by intellectual disabilities, it's measured in Connecticut as if your IQ is under 70. That's a little bit arbitrary. Not 70, but under 70. Those are people with intellectual disability. Back in the olden days, that was called, and I'm putting this in air quotes because it's now considered a slur, and I don't like using the word, and I don't mean to offend anyone. It's called mental retardation, in case you don't know. Deafness is a disability, blindness, autism, physical disabilities, like I said, and chronic health conditions, which can include things like asthma, lupus, diabetes, depending on the severity of it and how it affects your life. Next, please. So what do I mean by bias? Because this is about addressing disability bias. Bias is prejudice in favor against one thing or person or group compared with another, usually in a way that's considered to be unfair. So that's what I mean by bias, right? Next, please. And I want to take a minute to talk about intersectionality, because I can't talk about bias without talking about intersectionality. Black, brown, indigenous, and Asian Pacific Islander people and other multiply marginalized people with disabilities experience more bias and discrimination. So there's intersectionality. So the oppression compounds. So if I'm someone who is a person with a disability, a white person with disability, I experience bias. It's more if I'm a person of color with a disability, I experience more bias. If I'm a person of color with a disability that's LGBTQ, I experience more compounded bias. Okay, just keep intersectionality in mind, and I want to center that as much as I can. Next, please. So I want to talk about ableism too. Ableism, according to Merriam-Webster, is a noun. And their definition of ableism is discrimination or prejudice against individuals with disabilities. Next slide, please. I see ableism as oppression based on physical, mental, intellectual, cognitive, sensory, or other ability or perceived ability, the belief that not having a disability is superior to having a disability, and the belief that people without disabilities are superior to disabled people. That's Melissa Marshall. And that's a definition. I did not coin the term ableism, but I've been using the word ableism since I was in college, and I graduated in college in '83. So ableism is not a new term. It's new to being used. I'm still tickled every time I hear it, because it's hard when you've been using a term for 15 years that nobody knows what it means and no one knows what it is, and then finally people start using it. So ableism, next please. Ableism is at the root of disability bias, really. It's not the equivalent of racism, homophobia, or sexism, but it has analogous characteristics. I'm not saying it's the same as racism. I'm not even saying it's similar. I'm saying it has some analogous characteristics, okay? There are some parallels. So now we're gonna play a game virtually. We're gonna play several games today. I want you to think about a time when you felt completely comfortable with a person with a disability, a time when you felt less comfortable with the person with a disability. Someone once talked about, well, we'll talk about that later. I'm getting ahead of myself. So think about when you felt comfortable with someone with a disability, when you felt less than comfortable, and what made the difference. And I'm going to ask you to put that in the chat. I'm going to give you about 60 seconds for that. And I don't have my Jeopardy timer, so I'm actually going to use an actual timer on my handy dandy iPhone, which is great.
Melissa, we did have a couple more people type in some goals to the chat, so maybe I'll read those while other folks are thinking. So one was to become aware of barriers in my library that I'm not aware exist. Another was how to approach a patron who is possibly exhibiting a need based on disability without seeming rude or assuming. For example, a patron once came in who had some issues with severe muscle spasms. I was not sure to offer a chair. I was concerned about them struggling, but also afraid of insulting them.
And we will get to that. We won't be talking about barriers in your library. That's a whole other training. So we talked about making the virtual world accessible in the last training. We're talking about disability bias in this training, and the structural barriers are another training, or a site survey or something like that. So let me know if people are talking about times when they felt comfortable and when they haven't felt comfortable, and I see things coming in.
Yeah, so Maria's hello. The difference between comfort and less comfort was my perception of the person's intellectual abilities.
Your perception of their intellectual abilities. Okay, do we have anything else in the chat?
Not yet. We'll give people...
Keep typing, or I'll start humming Jeopardy. You don't want that. I hear it in my sleep sometimes. Let's stay
getting
here.
Ahead of us.
Mm-hmm. When have you felt uncomfortable? Yes, I see that Martha has put something in.
Yeah, so completely comfortable and acquaintance with a physical disability. Less than comfortable is someone with schizophrenia. Teresa, when I am with a relative who has spina bifida, I am very comfortable. When I'm with a relative who is autistic, Down syndrome, and nonverbal, I am unsure how to connect with her. Mm-hmm. Next is, I was comfortable when I was younger. I babysat for a girl who had multiple mental issues, but her parents told me how to proceed. Less comfortable when I had to approach a patron who was obviously having a break from reality, and he was harder to approach because I had no guidance.
Right, and when someone's told you what to do when you're providing care, that's great. It's great for that person's parents, and that was great for you, and great for the person you're babysitting. That's great. Yeah. So what I'm hearing is kind of a general theme when you know about someone. When you know more, you can do more. But we're going to play with this theme some more because, like I said, this is a game. Let's go to the next slide, Ashley. And I'm not seeing the whole slide come up.
Do you want me to go? I think I have to keep.
Okay, yes, do the first one. Just stay with that one, please. Great. The animation is working, folks. Technology is working. It's on our side today. This slide is in PowerPoint, not in Google Slides, and it's much easier to manipulate in PowerPoint than Google Slides with the animation. Who knew? Okay, so anyway, so I want you to imagine that you're seeing this gentleman, and I didn't do an audio description of myself, and I wanted to model doing that for people that, if there's anyone that doesn't see on this call, and I apologize for not doing that first. I normally do that. I'm Melissa Marshall. I am a medium complexioned white woman. I have shoulder length COVID gray hair, purple wire rimmed glasses, and today I'm wearing a purple blouse. I'm not a purple, like a dark pink blouse with some black patterning in it. And I have a painting, an abstract painting in the background behind me. So that's my audio description, and I forgot to do that. I apologize. So today we see this gentleman, and he is a young man. He is a young Black man. He's carrying several folders. He's using a manual wheelchair. He's kind of casually dressed. He's wearing jeans maybe, and maybe a sweatshirt. And he's sitting outside of a building. And he approaches, and he's using a manual wheelchair. And he approaches you. How many people feel a sense of, raise your hands, I feel a sense of discomfort? Like someone once brilliantly explained it as not knowing where to put your eyes. You look, but then you hear your mother's voice in your head saying, don't stare, so then you look away, but then you look, and then you look away. It's funny to watch that from the vantage point of a wheelchair user, I just have to tell you. How many feel that twinge? Maybe kind of like more one of them than one of us. What are we seeing, Ashley?
Nothing coming in yet. I will say somebody did add that comfort for me is sometimes related to whether I have lots of time and space, or I'm feeling pressure to assist someone and move on. As someone else is commenting, I struggle when I see kids misbehaving. The knowledge that they may be struggling with ADHD or similar at the same time thinking about the needs of other patrons, how to address that situation with sensitivity, and what to provide, whether that be alternate space or something.
Thank you, and we'll talk about that. So anyone feel, I'm going to ask you to put him in the them box because I've been doing this activity for a long time. So most people feel a twinge. So if you can just put him in the them box for now, you just slide him over into them for now. But wait, as you're starting to slide him, before I slide him up, let's pull him back out though. I want to give you some more information about him. He's that young guy that worked in IT for the library and did some consulting. You haven't heard him. You haven't seen him in a while. He calls you by name. Then you're really uncomfortable to the extent you're uncomfortable before, because it's that feeling of someone knowing your name. You don't know quite who they are. I live in that space because I'm kind of face blind and I meet lots of people, or used to physically meet lots of people back in the before times. But anyway, he calls you by name and he says, "Hey, how you doing? Can you believe during the pandemic, I fell down my basement stairs and I broke my leg and I have to use this stupid wheelchair for another 6 months, and there really isn't enough accessible parking anywhere in the world or at the library." And you make an appointment to you say you're going to get together and have coffee or lunch or something. You both know it probably won't happen, even though you'd like to do that. See, for anyone who's uncomfortable, is he a little bit more like one of us now? Show of hands. What are we seeing, Ashley?
Someone did add, as someone with a disability, I feel more connected with others approaching me, so he would be an us for me.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah,
I think Maria has her hand raised.
Yeah, go ahead if you're able.
Sorry, I thought I was agreeing that I do feel more like, because we have that connection, you know, and it's somebody I have chatted with previously. Exactly.
Let's put him in the us box. And just so you know, when I do this in person, I have lucite boxes that I put dolls in that look similar to these people. But let's put him in the us box for now. Okay, Ashley?
Yeah, I have to say, I'm not sure I'm going to be able to move it while in the presentation mode, but
you should be able to if you slide in. Okay, well, let's imagine him in the us box. Okay.
Yeah.
Now let's see. You're also at the library, and you see this gentleman. He's a white man, and he's middle-aged-ish, young middle-aged, and he's using a white cane. He's wearing a white shirt and a tie. He's dressed for business, and you see him approaching you. This looks like an alleyway. It's beside the library. It's a place where you go all the time. You see him approaching. He's using a white cane. And I want to know, does anyone feel that discomfort or a need to announce yourself? Or just sometimes, I confess, I've coughed because I don't want to say, "I'm here." I don't want to startle someone, so I cough. My friend says she's afraid everyone in the world has COVID because people cough around her. And before that, she said about tuberculosis. Maria is saying she would greet him. But you see this person. Anyone feel that kind of awkward, not knowing what to do? Anyone raise your hand feeling that awkward, know what to do? Some people would say hello. Mm-hmm. Okay, some people would say hello. Some people would greet him. Anyone feel the awkwardness? Let's move him over towards the them. Feel like it was greet him. If he was struggling, it would be awkward. Yeah, let's put him towards the them. Let's just start moving him there if you can move him. If you can't, that's okay. But wait, can we make him reappear? No, let's make him reappear. But I'm going to give you some more information about him. He's your mentor. He was the person, he's the head librarian, I didn't tell you that. But he was the person who, the time you did that stupid thing when you were 22, we all have that stupid thing we did when we were 22. You all know what it is. You don't need to share it with anyone. You don't need to think about it. But that stupid thing. And he talked your boss at the time out of A, firing you, and B, killing you. The person that helps you, the person you go to. Is he more like one of us? I'm guessing there's some hand raised. Do we have some hand raised for that, Ashley?
No, but we have a couple of comments coming in. Someone sharing I would probably nod and then hit myself and say hello. I appreciate the humor. I feel like I would greet him too, but if he were struggling, I would tend to be more awkward. I would be not awkward over his disability, but until you mentioned that he was a mentor, I was still uncomfortable. Maria, if he keeps me from being fired, he's a friend.
Exactly. So he's one of us now that you know more information about him. So we go on to the next person. And you see this woman in the city, and she is a woman wearing a winter hat, dark glasses, a plaid shirt or jacket. She's got a blanket pulled over herself. She's sitting on the ground against a wall on the ground. She's a plastic trash bag that's closed next to her, and it looks like those are her possessions. And the day that you see her, she isn't sitting there. She's standing and kind of ranting, not loudly, but gesturing at some people that you don't see there. People feel discomfort with her, not know what to do, feel uncomfortable. I see a hand raised. Any other hands raised? Yeah, I see lots of hand raised.
Few hands. Someone's commenting, I would feel sorry for her, or uncertainty.
Okay, and I think we're ahead a slide, Maria. I'm Maria.
Oh, sorry.
Ashley, sorry. And yeah, people feel kind of like she's one of them, that discomfort. If we can put her in the them box, or bring up the next person, whichever is easier. And this person, I don't have to introduce you to her. She is an African-American woman of medium complexion, and she's wearing what I think is a really great jacket with a gray sweater underneath it. That's a cowl sweater that comes over it, and the sweater is a little longer, and I think it looks great. She's got a green bag over her shoulders, and she's very smart looking, in my humble opinion. And I don't have to introduce you to her because she's a sister-in-law. And last family holiday, back in the before times when we all gathered safely for family holidays, you saw her in the kitchen, kind of gesturing and ranting just a little bit to some people you didn't see there. Do you feel more comfortable with her than the other woman? If people that put their hands up can now take their hands down, so we can see if you're putting your hands up for the second time. But how many people feel more comfortable with her? Someone's still uncomfortable. Martha's still uncomfortable. Someone says it's more an activity about family dynamics than anything else. Other people feel more comfortable with her. I'm seeing some hands raised about that. No, you'd be more concerned for her, uncomfortable that she's more in your space. Yeah. Here's the thing. The two women, and I don't think we can get the two of them up together. The two women have the same mental health diagnosis. They have the same mental health label. They're prescribed the same medication. Perhaps they're both not taking the same medication. But your sister-in-law is the family eccentric. She's taking medication for her nerves. She sees a therapist who doesn't see a therapist, but she gets medication for her nerves. So these two people have the same diagnosis. We're mostly more comfortable with the one we're related to than the one we're not related to. Why? If that's the case for you, why do you think that might be? Familiarity. She looks more like us. She dresses more like us. We have a history and we know them. All of those things. So now I'm going to ask you a question. And if we can stay on this slide for now. I'm going to ask you a question. These people made the journey from the them box to the us box. Their physical or mental or emotional ability did not change. What changed? You want to put that in the chat? That would be awesome. Just how well we knew them. Yep, I see that in the chat. What else?
Our comfort level, I'm seeing. Your comfort with everything else about them, and yeah, familiarity, our connection to them, the fact that we know them.
And you'll get virtual fabulous prizes. And your fabulous prizes for this one are going to be super balls of a color of your choosing. They're bouncy balls of a color of your choosing. Be careful not to trip over them. I'm going to ask you a question now. Who changed? Your perspectives changed. Who changed? You did. Ding, 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 ding. you changed, your perspective, your attitude changed. And this is good news. You might be wondering, why is this good news, Melissa? Why is that a good news thing? That's good news because what this means is you can get comfortable with anyone with any disability by getting more familiar with them. And you're thinking, except X disability. Everyone has an X disability that they're not comfortable with. My X disability, my first adult job while I was in law school, I was an intern. I worked at a disability state agency, which was great. And my boss had a disability, which was great. And he's cerebral palsy like me, which was even greater because I didn't have any role models. So it was wonderful. And he had a speech disability and he drooled. And he was my boss and he drooled. And he was my boss and he drooled in his tie. And he's my boss and he drooled. And I had all this cognitive dissonance, like, how could I judge that? How could I have a problem with that? And I was making my own head explode because I was supposed to be politically progressive and it's the same disability as me, and all that chatter is going on. Until there was a piece of legislation that I had to either talk him into supporting or talk him out of supporting, and I felt like he was making the wrong decision. Don't remember what it was. Heaven knows if I was right or not. I was all of 24 at that point, so might have been, might not have been. But once I had that intense, it wasn't an argument, it was a discussion where I was really engaged. Guess what? The fact that he was drooling went away because I was engaged in trying to persuade him of everything. Somebody's disability goes away when you get to know them. Does that mean you're going to like everybody with a disability? Of course not. No more than you're going to like everybody with green eyes or red hair or whatever color hair, whatever arbitrary characteristic. You will like some people a lot. Some people you feel kind of neutral about, and some people you might not like at all because we're not all compatible with everyone. And people with disabilities are no more nice than anyone else. We're not all nice. And sometimes in trainings, I've had people say to me, I like all people with disabilities. And this is a gift when someone shares something like that. But what it tells me is we get some more work to do, because it's like saying, I like all people with red hair. Probably haven't met enough people with red hair and gotten to know them as well. Next, please. Someone said exactly. Thank you. Implicit bias is bias that we're unconscious, that the holder of the bias is unaware of. It communicates that the person's bias is directed towards is less valuable than others. People towards whom unintentional bias is directed may or may not be aware of its existence and its effects, but it has effects on them. We're going to go right into the next slide if we can. Thank you so much, Ashley. Can you think of a time when someone has addressed a person with a disability in a way that was different than they would someone without a disability? Does their tone, speed of speech, or other nonverbal cues help or hinder the person with a disability to see themselves as someone who can be an adult reaching full potential and contributing to society? I'm going to give you some time to type in about that. Think about patrons. Think about people in the libraries. Think about colleagues. And I'd love for you to share one, or share something if you've seen that. And if you haven't, that is also okay.
So a couple of things coming in. I've seen it and unfortunately even done it with my own relative who has Down syndrome.
I just want to stop you. Congratulations for recognizing that, and self-awareness is really important, and that's the very first step. So give yourself a virtual fabulous prize of your choice.
Speaking loudly to a person with an intellectual disability, someone else sharing yelling at someone who is hard of hearing.
All of those things. Talking in a tone to someone, isn't it great that you're here at the library today? Welcome. Notice it's not what I said, it's how I said it. If I said, isn't it great you're here at the library today? Welcome. It's not what I said, it's how I said it. Tone. We communicate about 80% of what we're trying to communicate non-verbally, and that's just really important to remember. And it's about the tone. And people don't have a condescending tone because they're afraid and they don't know what to do. And I tell this story a lot of the times where I had this one day where I had an outfit that I thought was pretty good. You know, sometimes you get an outfit, you feel you won, you got the right outfit, it looks good, everything's going well that day. And someone did say to me, what a nice outfit, which would have been really, really fine. She said, what a nice outfit. Like I was on my way to my 4th birthday party. And she didn't mean it because she was a bad person. She had unconscious implicit bias and was scared and was nervous and didn't know what to do. And that's something we want to, what that communicates to me is that I'm not that valuable a person, and that I'm not that valued as an adult. Now, I'm been around in the world a couple times, so it doesn't bother me or affect me. It bothers me. I saw a teacher, a really, really, really good teacher, an excellent, amazing teacher, say to a young woman, a student who was a wheelchair user, who got around, had the joystick on her scooter, and she said to her class, "Look at how she gets around by pressing a button on her wheelchair. Isn't that amazing?" Now, if someone complimented me in my ability to press a button, that might not make me feel like I could do lots of other things. This person is now a mother of a child and doing quite well in life and gainful employment and does wonderful things in disability rights. But just be aware, tone is really important.
There's some more comments here. My niece with spina bifida is often spoken to as if she is a child rather than a 30-year addiction counselor.
Yes.
I have a colleague who speaks slowly with slurred speech because of a disability. I see others start talking over her before she has a chance to finish what she's saying. Others are a lack of patience with a person with a mental health issues. Speaking to a caregiver instead of to the person.
Yes, yes, yes. You want to speak, yes. Always speak to the person. All these things are great. Yes, they're not great things to do, but they're great examples. Yes.
They should be speaking to them as an equal person and appropriate for their age. The potential for error seems to be high, not knowing whether it's better to actually adapt to what they need, whatever that is, or to act, quote, normally. And yet perhaps that is a bias too, to judge that someone wasn't genuine in their amazement or compliments, or simply wants to make an effort to connect.
Well, it's fine in compliments. And one strategy, if you know the person, is to deflect. So if you have your niece who's a 30-year addiction counselor, and you're in a situation, you can't do this in the restaurant or when you're at the store or something, but if you're in a situation and someone's talking to her like she's a child, and she's meeting someone for the first time and they're really thrilled to meet her, and you say, yeah, and my cousin's a 30-year addiction counselor, and maybe some experience, this might be something you have in common and she's really good at it. Or with people in the library, especially with like children in the library, aren't they great because they can push their wheelchair? Well, yeah, and they're really good at chess too, or they're really good at wheelchair sports, or they're really good at whatever they're really good at, or they're really passionate about arts, kind of deflecting it and taking it away, not embarrassing your colleague or the other person because you don't want to embarrass them, because people don't do this out of ill will, and public humiliation is never a good thing. But what you want to do is kind of deflect and point out what they're good at, and you want to model using an appropriate tone and talk to people in appropriate ways. Let's go to the next slide, please. But these are all great examples. And saying, how is unconscious bias communicated? We talked about that. And communicates to people around them that they're just not able to accomplish much. And we're going to see a video about that too. Next, please. Implicit bias can manifest in concrete ways. And there's a young man who's a teenager, and he's wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and he's looking directly at and up against probably 20 or 30 steps. No architect sat down one morning and rubbed their hands together and said, 50 years from now, I'm going to express bias against a young person with a disability. That didn't happen. However, that might be how this person interprets it, and it might be the 50th place he's gone to this week where there was that kind of barrier. So it's not intention. It's what we're going to call microaggression that we deal with, and it's implicit bias. Next, please. Manifestations of unintentional bias look like things like positive stereotypes. Spoiler alert, there's no such thing as a positive stereotype. Stereotypes that are positive can be more damaging, but let's look at positive stereotypes. They're brave. My favorite story about that is my husband, years and years, decades ago, got into his car with a client. He was in sales again, way 100 years and 100 lifetimes ago. And my cane was there. And the client said, "What's that?" And my husband's kind of deadpan said, "It's a cane." He said, "Whose cane is it?" And he said, "It's my wife's cane." And they said, "She's so brave." all he knows about me is that I exist and I'm married to my husband and I use a cane. And my husband says, actually, she's terrified of spiders without missing a beat, which is true. I am. And everyone's brave some of the time, and some people are totally cowards. All of us are cowards some of the time. We're all a mixture. That we've overcome our disability. Spoiler alert, unless you have a temporary condition, you're not going to overcome your disability. You can have a great, fulfilling, magnificent, amazing, wonderful, exciting life and have a disability too. Doesn't mean it makes your disability go away. And that's okay. We're dependable. We're dependable. We always show up to work on time. And there's lots being said about people that are autistic. And well, you should hire them because they're dependable. And some people with autism like routine and show up on time and are reliable. Not all people. Well, what worries me about that comes really close to they're really dependable and they like routine and you can treat them whatever way you want in the workplace. I just have concern about that sometimes. We're inspirational. We get 9 minutes about inspirational. I'm not going to say anything else about that. Coming up soon. Okay. Next. Unintentional bias can lead to something called microaggressions. And microaggressions are the everyday slight put down, indignity, or invalidation unintentionally directed towards a marginalized group. And there's a quote from Dr. Gerald Sue, a professor of psychology and education. And the concept of microaggressions was originally about race, then it moved into gender and sexual orientation, and now disability. Let's go to the next slide and look what microaggressions are and what they mean. So let's give you some examples of disability microaggressions. Assuming someone with autism has a photographic memory and ask him or her to remember the date of a random event. Seen that happen. Moving away someone ever so slightly right after they disclose themselves as having a psychiatric disability. And like we saw in the last slide, architecture that's not accessible to people with mobility disabilities. Next, please. I call this the microaggression equation. It's microaggression plus microaggression plus microaggression at infinity plus microaggression leads to and equals alienation from the world, frustration, just please stop doing this to me. If you tell me you're going to give me a ticket for driving my scooter too fast one more time because you're the 50,000th person who's done it to me, I might get cranky. Frustration. Low self-esteem. You're telling me I'm wonderful for pushing a button on my chair. That really probably means I can't do much else. Discrimination. I might violate the law. And ableism. It contributes to whole ableism. So microaggressions are at the root of all of this, and it supports and facilitates ableism. Next. Unintentional bias can lead to low expectations, and for those of you that work with youth, that's really important. Low expectations of people with disabilities contributes to low self-esteem, not feeling potential, and I really, really believe to our high unemployment rate. People with disabilities are out of the workforce, participate in the workforce at a rate of about 33%. That means 66% of us that want to participate in the workforce are not. There's lots of reasons for that. I worked in a group that worked with a collective of corporations that worked to collaborate and trying to figure out how to get people with disabilities jobs and get people with disabilities to work. So at one point in my life, I spent lots of time every day being paid to think about this, and yet our unemployment rate maintains stuck. And one factor is the low expectations. So what people with disabilities need is high expectations from families, high expectations from educators, high expectations from adult role models in their lives, like library staff and librarians. Ding, 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 ding. You can make a difference in someone's life by having high expectations. Not unrealistic expectations. If I'm blind and I say I want to be an airplane pilot, with technology that exists today, that's probably not in my cards. But you might want to ask me what jazzes me about being an airline pilot. Maybe it's I like being at airports. Maybe it's something like that. So think about that. Ask me what I want to do. Don't limit me. But also don't say I can do anything. I have a friend with significant cerebral palsy, and I knew her when she was in high school. And she's someone who didn't feed herself, and her speech was real hard to understand. And she's now an attorney, by the way. And people would say to her, you can be anything you want. What do you want to be when you grow up? And she's like 16 or 17 at the time. And sometimes she'd say, a neurosurgeon. No, she couldn't be a neurosurgeon, what with not being able to hold a knife and fork, and that kind of tested if they understood what she was saying, but it also helped her make her point that no, she couldn't be anything she wanted, and she's now an attorney. The next slide, I just want to do it, is it's a content warning. Just, you know, we talk about, the next slide is bias can lead to death. And this is a picture of a man named Michael Hickson. He's in a hospital bed in a hospital gown with tubes on his nose, looks like an oxygen tube. And he's surrounded by his 5 adoring children. He's beaming, everyone's beaming. That was taken on June 5th of 2020. Michael Hickson was a man who acquired a spinal cord injury and a brain injury from the same accident. He was placed in a nursing home against his wife's wishes, but he lived in Texas, and they can do that in Texas if you don't want what the state wants. And from being in the nursing home, he contracted COVID. And because something like, it's 33% now, last summer 75% of deaths came from people in nursing facilities, even though it's 0.07% of the population. He was in a nursing home, contracted COVID, went to the hospital. The doctor refused to give him treatment, not because there was rationing, but because he said he had no quality of life. And I know this because his wife, Melissa Hickson, who I've become friendly with, and we started working together, taped that and put that in video. And her name is Melissa Hickson. His name is Michael Hickson. You should look this up and hear the transcript. The doctor said he's no quality of life, so I'm not giving him treatment. And he was put into hospice, and he died from natural causes. And you die from natural causes when you've had food and hydration withheld for 6 days. It is undeniable that Michael Hickson is loved, and it's undeniable that Michael Hickson loved. And this was a few days before his death. And just understand, it's bias can lead to those little microaggressions, but we have this bias, A, that people with disabilities belong in nursing facilities and institutions, and B, don't have a good quality of life. And notice that Michael Hickson was a Black man. Black people were more likely to get COVID, more likely to be institutionalized, and more likely to be refused treatment. So I think that intersectionality piece of this is really important, and we need to talk about that in every training. So next, please. And Melissa Hickson, Michael's wife, is working on passing legislation in the state of Texas to make sure that something like that doesn't happen again. And she's a wonderful person, and I'm really sorry for the circumstances under which I've gotten to know her, but really glad that I've gotten to know her. And there are, in that picture, there are 5 children between 14 and 18 or 19, because 2 of them are twins. And that's their lovely family. I want to talk about language for a little bit. Please refer to disabled people or people with disabilities. Avoid language that presupposes the negative. Victim of. There was a cartoon once, and it had someone who previously walked, presumably, lying flat on the ground with tire tracks on their back, and then a wheelchair in the distance, a power wheelchair driving off into the distance, and the caption below it read, "Wheelchair victim." I am not a wheelchair victim when I use my scooter. Members of my family often are when I run over their toes. We're not victims. I'm not suffering from cerebral palsy. People don't suffer from disabilities. They have them. Also avoid language that groups people, the disabled, the mentally ill. Mentally ill isn't a great term to use anyway. Most people with psychiatric disabilities and mental health conditions don't like that term. There's more stigma around psychiatric disabilities, and just so you know some language. Now we're going to do some etiquette scenarios. If we can go on to the next slide. Thank you. Ways of offering help. This is something in my very first awareness training that I did was in high school. I talked about this. I didn't talk about it in these ways, but it hasn't changed, and people still have questions about it. Here's something. Have you helped a youth or someone else with a disability? Maybe say, can I get that for you? How can I help? What would be most helpful here? It looks like holding the door would be a good idea. Is that okay? Asking for help. Now, some people, particularly young people, and not just young people, might say, no, I'm fine, because they want to struggle with that door. When I was 14, I would make my mother watch me struggle with the door when I was on crutches. Had less to do with my disability and more to do with me about being 14, but that's where I was, and she got mortified, but respected that. And now we struggle because she uses a walker and I use a scooter, and we fight over who's going to open the door for the other one, and it's still funny, and she's 95. So, but some things always continue. Asking someone if they want help first is the #1 rule. And if someone's cranky and you say, can I help you? And they go, no, you shouldn't have asked me for help. Well, that's their problem. Maybe they're having a bad day. Maybe they're an nasty person, whatever. Next slide, please. Hold on 1 second. I'm going to skip this slide for right now, Ashley, and we might come back to slide 28. So I want to do some more etiquette scenarios. Person with a speech disability approaches you and you can't understand a word she's saying. What do you do? I'm going to cue the internal Jeopardy music and give you some time to type into the chat box what you do when someone approaches you. Maybe you're at the desk at the library, she approaches you in your professional capacity, and she's asking you something, you can't understand a darn thing she's saying. What do you do? I can't say what, if anything, do you do? Because you got to do something. I see, ask a machine, write it down. That's a great first thing to do. That's really well, the first thing to do, you can have someone repeat themselves, right? They repeat themselves, wonderful, that's a great thing to ask them. You still don't get it, take a deep breath, because the more relaxed you are, the more likely you are to understand. Ask her to write it down, except she has cerebral palsy and she can't hold a pencil. What else do we have in the chat, Ashley? Because I've been kind of skimming.
I think you're covering it. A few people have mentioned asking to repeat the question, asking if writing would work.
Asking if writing would work. That's a good, not say, oh, can you just. Sometimes I think the word just should be eliminated from the English language or other languages. Can you just write this down? Well, no, I don't write, I can't write. What you want to do, you might build a word. I heard something about a book or a program. Did I get that word right? You can usually get a yes or no from eye contact with somebody. What you want to communicate to the person is, we're going to figure this out together and I'm not going to abandon you, I'm not going to leave. If someone has someone with them, what do you do? What you do is you might say to the person asking you the question, I see there's someone with you. Do I have your permission to ask the other person for help? And that person with a speech disability is going to go, yes, I just want the information, lady or gentleman. I just want the information. And they're going to say yes. What you don't want to do is turn away from the person with disability towards the person without a disability, saying, what does she want? And ignore her. What you would want to do is say, so I thought I heard you saying something about a program. Was it a program in a book? Are you talking about that film? Are you talking about, and stay in contact with them, make eye contact with them, and use the person as an interpreter and kind of ignore them and just listen to her. That does two things. The most important thing does, it shows you respect for that person with the disability. Secondly, it validates that they're getting it right, because they might get it wrong too, but you want to show your respect for that person. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and a couple other comments, I think, building on that. One person said, I'm having trouble understanding. What can we do? Someone else said, I asked to repeat and then repeat what I think I understand back to the person for confirmation. And then, yes, someone else is commenting on, is it all right if I ask your friend?
Yes, let's say they don't have a friend with them. One thing you could do is say, there's other people here in the library that might be better able to help. Is it okay? Do I have your permission to go get them? They're going to say yes, and there might be sometimes having a third person there, another perspective helps. Some people are more skilled at that. Sometimes just the more relaxed you are, someone else coming in might be able to help. What we want to communicate to someone is, you're going to stay there until this is resolved. The thing you never ever do is go, or pretend to understand what they're saying. Just don't do that. They could be saying they hate your mother and she looks funny and she dresses you funny. I had a friend with a very significant speech disability used to do that to people in cars and say, you know what you said yes to early? You're just pretending to understand me. But I think bringing someone there, maybe someone can type something if they can't write. There's all kinds of ways to do it, but brainstorming and thinking about ways that will work. Maybe someone uses a communication board. Maybe it's not accessible to them. Maybe you can write some letters down and they can point to it. There's all kinds of things that might be able to be done. So brainstorm with the person. And I try to take the attitude as a disabled person is, we're going to figure this out together, because the time that I got a flat tire at Bradley, I'm in an airport, they have lots of wheelchairs and they have ways of transporting devices. So I know it's going to be okay, but I'd flag someone down and say, okay. And they kept saying to me, well, who's picking you up? No one's picking me up. You don't have a ride? No, I drove here myself. You drove your own car. Yes, but all I need you to do is get me and my wheelchair to the car. How about if I get in a manual wheelchair and someone pushes me and you put my scooter on one of the millions of carts going around? But I take that attitude with them. That shouldn't have to be my job, but you can take that attitude with patrons. I don't know what the answer is, and we're going to figure this out together. And that works a lot. Next, please. A participant in a library group doesn't want a sign language interpreter for a deaf person participant because the information discussed will not be kept confidential according to them. What do you say? What do you do? They don't want an interpreter there because it won't be confidential, and they might say confidential things in that group. What do you say? You can type that in the Q&A box. That would be fantastic.
Someone's asking, isn't that a legal obligation?
Yes, it is a legal obligation. It is a legal obligation. Anyone else have any other feedback? Also, know that, not that it matters, but an interpreter signs an oath of confidentiality, and anything that she says is confidential, and interpreters at Blab don't have jobs, and it's confidential. And whether it's proprietary information or just something personal and confidential. And there have been court cases about this, is not specifically the libraries, but there have been court cases in a variety of scenarios where people didn't want an interpreter there, and that's kind of their problem. Next.
A couple of people kind of commenting on that, reiterating that everything said in the room is confidential. Right. All people there are part of that confidentiality. Exactly.
And you never have to ask an interpreter to sign a confidentiality agreement, though you can, because that's their job. That's part of their oath. That's part of what they do. Next, please. I'm just looking at making sure your scenario. An applicant with a disability for a job arrives for an interview. The applicant has arm, legs, and prosthetics and uses a wheelchair. What do you do? You can type into the chat.
Interview them.
Interview them. Yay, yay. You get a fabulous prize. I know that's an obvious question. I know that's an obvious question. Understand people get scared when they see someone that looks unlike what they expected them to look like. And sometimes when people are anxious or frightened, they don't act the way they would normally typically act. I have a friend who's an attorney, and she at one point in her life was interviewing for jobs as like a trial lawyer. So she was being interviewed by partners in major law firms. So these are people who do cross-examinations, and they do cross-examinations, and they interview witnesses, and they're on the stand, and they deal with judges, and they deal with all kinds of people under all kinds of pressure, and they're really sophisticated, and they're smart, and they're tough, and they're on their feet, right? She'd go into an interview, and these major partners would stare at her like deer in the headlight because she was a wheelchair user and a person of stature whose body looks somewhat different than typical people's. They would get totally flipped out about that, to the point where she had a disciplinary resume to prepare them somewhat. She's like, yeah, they can't discriminate against me, but I want them to get past the terror so they can actually find out that I am, in fact, the most qualified applicant for that job. It happens. So what you want to do is just take a breath. If someone doesn't look like you think they look like, just interview them for that job. And I know that sounds like an obvious question, but it's something that people get concerned about. And I see something in the chat. If you could read that, Ashley.
Yeah, I'm just gonna scroll up. So Amy is commenting that realize that being a reference librarian doesn't really require me to move 30 pounds. And then she's adding to that. By that I mean we have strength information in many job descriptions for no reasons. Just she's clarifying what she said, but it's a good point.
This is Melissa, and you don't have to stand to be a reference librarian and all of those things. That's a whole other training around legal obligations. But yes, absolutely, positively, that's something important to reference, and that's really important. Next slide, please. Go ahead, Ashley. Sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to say a couple other comments on this one was making sure there's space for someone's wheelchair, welcoming them, treat them just like you would other applicants, etc. So
have your interview at a wheelchair accessible venue. Just saying. Always have it in a wheelchair accessible venue because you don't know who's coming in. You don't know if someone uses a wheelchair. They're under no obligation, nor should they disclose that unless they choose to disclose that ahead of time, like my friend did. Always have interviews in wheelchair accessible locations. And people with prosthetics can do all kinds of things. Don't make assumptions about what someone can do with a prosthetic. I have a friend who has 4 prosthetics, and his limbs end like at the elbow and the knees, and he uses prosthetics in ways that I don't understand, and his signature is better than mine ever could be. And I will watch him do things just because I'm kind of fascinated. I don't spend that much time with him. I was watching him eat a hamburger more neatly than I could and went, that's really impressive. And I wasn't doing the patronizing. I was like, that's really impressive. I was like, that's really impressive. You do that better than me. But don't make presumptions that someone can't pick up a piece of paper and do all kinds of things, or maybe they can. You don't know. You can ask. Next scenario. Again, you see a person who uses 4-arm canes struggling to open a door. And we have a picture of someone with 4-arm crutches struggling to open a car door. What do you do?
Ask if they need help. Asking, is it all right if I help you with this? Asking, may I help you?
Right. And if they say no, just go on. Because keep in mind, they might be good at doing that. If you see a blind person crossing the street, if I'm downtown in a major city and I had to cross the street without being able to see while I had my eyes covered, I might get killed. If I was a blind person, I probably had a whole lot of mobility skills training and know what I'm doing. So if someone looks confident and comfortable, don't project into that, oh, if I were blind, I'd be scared. Well, if you're blind, you probably have mobility training. So, this whole other thing, but don't project into them. But if someone looks scared and confused, say, of course, if a truck is coming, you knock someone out of the way, obviously. But if someone looks confused, say, how can I help you? Can I help you? And keep it casual. Now, how can I help you? What can I do? How do we do this? Next, please. Okay, so you witness a colleague engaging in condescending behavior towards a patron with a disability. They're talking about them, and it's wonderful that they're here today. What can you do? What might you do? What, if anything, might you do in that situation? They're a colleague of yours. They might even be your supervisor. And it's towards a patron with a disability. Hint, we talked about this a little bit before. I see something in the chat.
I'd probably Kool-Aid Man over there and take over. Next step, depending upon that person's rank.
You'd probably what? I didn't hear you, Ashley.
She said, is saying Kool-Aid Man over there. I don't know if I don't know what that means. So I could be, let's see. Someone's saying approach and engage in the conversation, modeling different behavior.
Yeah.
Depends if it's with the patron model better communication. If it's farther away, take them aside and say, if I can hear you, they probably can too. Maybe get in the midst of the conversation and change the tone.
Yep, model that tone, deflect if you know anything about the other person. So they're engaging in a condescending behavior towards a patron with a disability. Next slide. You witness maybe that same colleague, maybe another colleague, engaging in condescending behavior towards another colleague with a disability. What do you do then? What do you say? What do you say? When might you say it? And what might you say? It's a little trickier.
So someone is suggesting to call HR. Say to them, you may not realize this, but your tone was a bit off and non-complimentary for that situation.
Mm-hmm. And you could do the old deflect. Helen just started here, Hank just started here, and they're really good at X thing, or how about them Mets, or whatever you deflect with small talk kind of thing. Make that work for you and model appropriate behavior. And someone's saying call HR. What was the first one? I can't read all of that, Ashley.
Someone is saying same thing, but definitely mention to the person later that this is inappropriate. Explain to the wronged party that you don't agree, excuse me, call HR. Agreeing with somebody's earlier comment, sometimes people don't realize how they come across.
Exactly. And the person probably didn't say, I'm going to be mean to somebody with a disability because I want to oppress them. That probably isn't what happened. They probably just didn't know what to do. There's a pattern of practice behavior that they've been corrected on and have a corrected action plan. That's really different. But probably they just didn't know what to do and didn't realize how they're coming across. And maybe you could talk about some strategies. Next slide. So now you brought up some situations where you didn't know what to do before. You talked about, and I'm going to ask you to type more in if you can think of more. You talked about one situation where you had, I think, a kid with ADHD and when it's bad behavior and how to support that kid. And I think it's really important. We label certain behaviors as bad and acting out, and that might be way how that child can express themselves. And I think it's taking them aside, focusing on them, going to a quieter space, finding out what's really going on, letting them walk around. Sometimes pacing up and down is really good. Maybe they want to pace up and down around the whole inside of the library rather than just in front of your desk. I pace in a wheelchair, so I know that can be distracting. I have 2 kids that pace. They're adult children that pace, and I get that can be distracting, but people sometimes need to move around to express that energy, and that's okay. That doesn't mean there's anything wrong. That means that's how they think, that's how they process things. I don't know if that answers what you're saying, because I don't remember all of what you're saying about the person with ADHD, the kid with ADHD. And I forget who said that.
I do too. I'm
Please feel free to type in the chat. And I see something in the chat now. My view is slightly different than Ashley's, which is why I can't read the chat. I'm using
No worries. So we had a homeless person in the library who was very antagonistic, thinking we were going to be rude. Very challenging to us regarding our behavior to him.
Yes, and understand you don't have to put up with inappropriate behavior from people with disabilities because they have a disability any more than you have to put up with inappropriate behavior from someone else. So if someone is rude to you, is threatening to you, you deal with them just like someone else who is rude or threatening to you, and just understand that you have that right to be safe. Now, what you want to do a check on is, are they threatening you or are they talking to people you don't see there? Those are 2 really different things. Are they threatening you, or have they not changed their clothes in a long time, and do they smell? Are they threatening you, or are they just behaving in a way that's different, and differentiating out those kinds of things? Just because, and I feel an obligation to say this whenever I talk about mental health and in all my bias trainings, people with someone with psychiatric disabilities are no more likely to be violent than anyone else in the general population. They are more likely to be victims and targets of violence. Media has this myth, person with mental illness did this and did that, and that's not the norm. So just, when there was the shooting, probably maybe even 10 years ago in Aurora, Colorado, where someone shot, it was at the Batman premiere of the movie, and they shot a whole bunch of people, and they said it was a schizophrenic man that did it. My best friend's son happens to live in Aurora, and he happens to have schizophrenia. And he called his mom in Denver the next day, which is a nearby town, and said, they're all going to think I'm a murderer or a potential murderer. Now they've linked schizophrenia and murderers together. And my friend, who's a disability rights activist, disavowed that notion in the press and publicly, which was a good thing that she was there to do that. But we kind of linked those things. You think about the movie Psycho, like Psycho and Killer. We associate people with psychiatric disabilities as violent, and that's not the case. And that's just something to remember. What else is in the chat?
The same person is adding to that experience. He was ready for us to be rude, but he calmed down when we didn't make a big deal about his appearance.
Right. Sometimes it's just being respectful to people, talking to a person one-on-one, having a respectful tone. Hey, how you doing? What's up today? Yeah, like it's stressful enough. It's a pandemic. What's going on with you? Just making the small talk and just talking to a person like they're a person. And someone who's experiencing homelessness is not used to that. They're used to the person averting their eyes, crossing the street, thinking they're going to be violent, thinking they're going to be dangerous. So just building relationship with that person. And now we're going to come back and for questions, but now we're going to have what I think is going to be the most fun 9.5 minutes of your day. So I want to watch this with you. And this is a TED Talk by a woman named Stella Young. And Stella Young is a person of short stature whose body looks somewhat different than other people's. She has osteogenesis imperfecta, and sadly she passed away at 32 about 6 years ago. Can hear now.
I grew up in a very small country town in Victoria. I had a very normal, low-key kind of upbringing. I went to school, I hung out with my friends, I fought with my younger sisters. It was all very normal. And when I was 15, a member of my local community approached my parents and wanted to nominate me for a Community Achievement Award. And my parents said, that's really nice, but there's kind of one glaring problem with that. She hasn't actually achieved anything. Yeah. And they were right, I went to school, I got good marks, I had a very low-key after-school job in my mum's hairdressing salon, and I spent a lot of time watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Dawson's Creek. Yeah, I know, what a contradiction. But they were right, I wasn't doing anything that was out of the ordinary at all. I wasn't doing anything that could be considered an achievement if you took disability out of the equation. Years later, I was on my second teaching round in a Melbourne high school, and I was about 20 minutes into a Year 11 legal studies class when this boy put up his hand and said, "Hey, miss, when are you going to start doing your speech?" And I said, "What speech?" I'd been talking to them about defamation law for a good 20 minutes. And he said, like your motivational speaking. When people in wheelchairs come to school, they usually say, like, inspirational stuff. It's usually in the big hall. And that's when it dawned on me. This kid had only ever experienced disabled people as objects of inspiration. We are not, to this kid, and it's not his fault. I mean, that's true for many of us. For lots of us, disabled people are not our teachers or our doctors or our manicurists. We're not real people. We are there to inspire. And in fact, I'm sitting on this stage looking like I do in this wheelchair, and you are probably kind of expecting me to inspire you, right? Yeah. Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you dramatically. I'm not here to inspire you. I'm here to tell you that we have been lied to about disability. Yeah, we've been sold the lie that disability is a bad thing. Capital B, capital T. It's a bad thing. And to live with disability makes you exceptional. It's not a bad thing, and it doesn't make you exceptional. And in the past few years, we've been able to propagate this lie even further via social media. You may have seen images like this one: the only disability in life is a bad attitude. Or this one: your excuse is invalid, indeed. Or this one: before you quit, try. Yeah. These are just a couple of examples, but there are a lot of these images out there. You might have seen the little girl with no hands drawing a picture with a pencil held in her mouth. You might have seen a child running on carbon fibre prosthetic legs. And these images, there are lots of them out there. They are what we call inspiration porn. And I use the term porn deliberately because they objectify one group of people for the benefit of another group of people. So in this case, we're objectifying disabled people for the benefit of non-disabled people. The purpose of these images is to inspire you, to motivate you, so that we can look at them and think, well, however bad my life is, it could be worse. I could be that person. But what if you are that person? I've lost count of the number of times that I've been approached by strangers wanting to tell me that they think I'm brave or inspirational. And this was long before my work had any kind of public profile. They were just kind of congratulating me for managing to get up in the morning and remember my own name. And it is objectifying. These images objectify disabled people for the benefit of non-disabled people. You know, they are there so that you can look at them and think that things aren't so bad for you, to put your worries into perspective. And life as a disabled person is actually somewhat difficult. We do overcome some things, but the things that we're overcoming are not the things that you think they are. They are not things to do with our bodies. I use the term disabled people quite deliberately because I subscribe to what's called the social model of disability, which tells us that we are more disabled by our bodies, the society that we live in rather, than by our bodies and our diagnoses. So I've lived in this body a long time. I'm quite fond of it. It does the things that I need it to do, and I've learnt to use it to the best of its capacity, just as you have. And that's the thing about those kids in those pictures as well. They're not doing anything out of the ordinary. They are just using their bodies to the best of their capacity. So is it really fair to objectify them in the way that we do, to share those images? People, when they say, you know, you're an inspiration, they mean it as a compliment. They mean it as a compliment. And I know why it happens. It's because of the lie. It's because we've been sold this lie that disability makes you exceptional. And it honestly doesn't. And I know what you're thinking. You know, I'm up here bagging out inspiration. You're thinking, geez, Stella, aren't you inspired sometimes by some things? And the thing is, I am. I learn from other disabled people all the time. I'm learning not that I am luckier than them, though. I am learning that it's a genius idea to use a pair of barbecue tongs to pick up things that you drop. I'm learning that nifty trick where you can charge your mobile phone battery from your chair battery. Genius. We are learning from each other strength and endurance, not against our bodies and our diagnoses, but against a world that exceptionalizes and objectifies us. I really think that this lie that we've been sold about disability is the greatest injustice. It makes life hard for us. And that quote, "the only disability in life is a bad attitude," the reason that that's bullshit is because it's just not true. Because of the social model of disability, you know, no amount of smiling at a flight of stairs has ever made it turn into a rap. Never. You know, smiling at a television screen isn't going to make closed captions appear for people who are deaf. You know, no amount of standing in the middle of a bookshop and radiating a positive attitude is going to turn all those books into Braille. It's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. I really want to live in a world where disability is not the exception but the norm. I want to live in a world where a 15-year-old girl sitting in her bedroom watching Buffy the Vampire Slayer isn't referred to as achieving anything because she's doing it sitting down. I want to live in a world where we don't have such low expectations of disabled people that we are congratulated for getting out of bed and remembering our own names in the morning. I want to live in a world where we value genuine achievement for disabled people. And I want to live in a world where a kid in year 11 in a Melbourne high school is not one bit surprised that his new teacher is a wheelchair user. Disability doesn't make you exceptional, but questioning what you think you know about it does. Thank you.
Mrs. Melissa, was that not a fun 9 minutes of your life? If people want to put feedback in, that would be great. We can go on to the next slide. So I really like Stella, and sadly I never got to meet her, which is sad, and it's sad that she's no longer with us, but I think her contributions was amazing. And I want to pause for questions, but first I was told, and this is okay, I was told by Ashley to do this. I'm going to plug my, it's not a new book, it's been out a year, but I didn't really market it during the pandemic. It's called are you saying this backwards? I can't swim, but I haven't drowned yet. Notes from a disability rights activist. And it's by Melissa Marshall, of course. And it's available through Amazon and Barnes & Noble. So if people, and it's also available as an ebook. It's not an audiobook yet, but if people would like to have more information about that, or would like that for your libraries, it's a 200-page book that's about the history of the disability rights movement through the lens of my career. But keep in mind, it has the same kind of tone, the conversational tone I have in this presentation. So it's not academic. I think it's like 30 or 40 footnotes, but it's not academic. It's not a tome. It's a quick, light read, and it's fun for people who want to get interested in the disability rights movement. My audience are people who want to be, young people who want to be activists in any area, or people that aren't as young who want to learn about the disability rights movement, want to learn about activism, because it crosses activism as activism, and the same tips that I learned in my career are tips that people can use in other areas of activism. So just wanted to let you know, it's I can't swim, but I haven't drowned yet. Notes from a disability rights activist. And so I want to take some time to see if you have any questions about what Stella said or about the presentation in general. I always feel like I shouldn't speak after Stella, because what can I say that she didn't say, and didn't say really well? Again, in libraries, you're dealing with people with all kinds of disabilities, and people with autism, and people with all kinds of disabilities. And again, people have all kinds of different ways of interacting in this world, and that's okay. And people express themselves in different ways. People ask questions in different ways. And I interact with different people differently. I have a friend who, I can say this because he feels this is valid. He feels that he's labeled as someone who gets psychotic and delusional. And he called me one day and he said to me, so I hear there's a plot for the Department of Mental Health to take our brains and take control of our brains. He went, is that delusional? I went, yep. He said, you sure? Yeah, okay, thank you. And went on with his day. And he's someone, you know, who has quite a bit of education, who has a terminal degree in something. And it's just, it was building that relationship of trust where you could share something with me that may or may not be a delusion. I'm perfectly comfortable saying, no, you're making it up. If you called and said there's an advocacy point, I say, okay, maybe there's something we need to talk about here. And it's knowing, you know, what's the difference in those things. Another friend who's, you know, told me about something that happened to him, and it all seemed, it could have been likely, it could have been unlikely, but then he said the sun didn't set that night. So I kind of leaned towards none of it happened, but all the other things happened except the sun did in fact set that night. So you want to, in delusion, there's always often a grain of truth, or, you know, it's not binary. People's experiences aren't binary. I use a wheelchair and I walk around my house, and I've gotten more garbage for that. Oh, you're making it up. You don't really need that wheelchair. Why don't you just walk and not surrender to that wheelchair? Wheelchair use isn't binary. I could sit in this chair, eating bonbons, watching television, reading a book, and never use a wheelchair. I also couldn't work and have a career and do the wonderful things I like to do in my life, which used to include traveling, and will again someday soon as the pandemic subsides. So it's not binary. Other questions, comments, thoughts out there? Things you've always wondered what to do? This is your space to ask it, and your permission to put that in the chat. Thank you. Someone said they appreciate how I broke it down. See, now I don't have my slides on the screen. I broke it down, made it so simple to understand and apply. Thank you. Thank you for participating. Thank you for coming today. I had a great time. Training is the thing I love doing best in the world. And I love doing legal training and I love doing bias training for different reasons. So it's like asking me which of my children I love more. They're just both really different. I do appreciate when I get to spend a 90-minute time where I get to utter the 3-syllable word pandemic very few times, because that's the world that I live in right now. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Have a wonderful Memorial weekend, and I hope we get to connect again soon. So thank you very much. And if you have questions about the book, you can ask Ashley. And you can ask me. You all have my contact information. You all have my phone number, and you have my email. So thank you very much. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Bye-bye.
Great. Thank you so much, Melissa. Thank you, everyone, for joining us, and take care.